Hi, everybody. This is Dave G. I'd like to welcome you to the Entrepreneurship Educators Association Speaker Series. Today, we have an awesome guest, Austin Beveridge. I'll introduce you to Austin in a moment. So first of all, if you're not familiar with the Entrepreneurship Educators Association, we're an organization that helps high school entrepreneurship teachers from all around the world collaborate, get free teaching resources, to help them build future innovators and entrepreneurs. Today's show is sponsored by Planet Pitch. So Planet Pitch is a social, an international social entrepreneurship pitch competition for high school students. And it's going to be a brand new event. It's launching in May. It's completely inclusive. So any high school student anywhere in the world can compete to win college scholarships and prizes. And you can learn more about Planet Pitch at planetpitch.co. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is introduce our guest, Austin Beveridge. Austin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, G. How's the day going? Exciting out there?
It's going well. Yes, working away obviously at Whitewater, and just excited to be here today. So first of all, Austin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, grew up in Wisconsin. Always was around entrepreneurs. Always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but didn't really know what that meant. First started selling Xboxes during Black Friday, and then I'd flip them over the weeks to come. Then ended up going to college, thought I wanted to be an accountant, and realized it wasn't for me. I could see all the rules, but all I wanted to do was break them, which doesn't work so well as an accountant.
No.
And so then got into startups and really started honing my skill set and realized marketing was right for me. Graduated from college, worked at a corporation, learned a ton, and then decided to make the leap out west and ended up landing in San Francisco, where I joined a startup then, scaled the startup from the second marketing hire to a $12 billion fintech with just over 1,000 people. And now I head up marketing at ARC, which just raised its $20 million Series A, and we've raised just over $180 million to date. So it's going really well. It's been an exciting journey, and excited to share some of those learnings here today. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about Bolt. Obviously, you learned a ton there. You made the transition from corporate to a startup like Bolt, and guessing the cultures were a little bit different.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of predispositions of like corporate is dry and corporate is boring, but the reality is corporate's really interesting. You get to learn a lot of different things, whether it's navigating cross-functional departments, learning how to collaborate with different teams across multiple lines of the business, et cetera. And so you learn a ton really, really quick. It's also really stable, right? So there's no real risk of, you want to grow 1 or 2%. So you could spend the next week growing that 1 or 2%. With startups, very different environment. You have to act almost all day, every day with the intention of delivering value for the business, because the reality is that if you don't work, if you don't deliver value, you can go under. And that's a real risk. And so you have to work a lot harder. But it's also a hell of a lot of fun, right? You're pushing the boundaries. Instead of trying to get 1 or 2% on top line revenue, you're trying to go get 100%, 200%, 300%. So you think about things much differently. You think about it more holistically, and it's just a completely different mindset. And the people you're working with are a completely different mindset too, right? They're willing to take risks. They're willing to go out there and fail, but learn from it and grow. And so when I first took into the startup world out west, I was just blown away by how differently they approach problems and how differently they approach risk, and how risk was okay. And as long as you failed, but you learned something from it, that's all that mattered. And so it was a super interesting dichotomy of those two experiences. But I would say I wouldn't change it any other way. You have the organizational side that you learn a lot there, but then you learn to think on your feet. And so when you combine those two and be able to operate under pressure, that's where you can really start to succeed.
Right. Okay, great. So tell us, you're the head of marketing, I believe. I think I accidentally put CMO somewhere, but whatever. Potatoes. So tell us a little bit about ARC. It's quite a company. I've never heard of anything like it before we started talking a few weeks ago.
Yeah. So what we're trying to build is the future of startup finance. So what does that mean? It means we provide all the tools that startups need to access capital save the capital, and efficiently deploy the capital. The way that we do that is through our two core products today, which is a funding product and a banking product. So on the banking side, it's the highest yielding bank account in the entire United States. And you can use it just as you would with a regular operating account. And so essentially you can do ACHs, you can wires, you can do bill pays, etc. And then on the backside, you have funding. And so startups who have cash flow and have revenues can advance their future revenue. So let's say you have contracts for $1 million, but they don't pay back for the next 12 months. Instead of waiting every single month to receive that payback, you can advance all of that revenue to today and then take that capital and deploy it right into your business. And so when you take that capital and then deposit it into the bank account, and then you have access to financial insights to say, when does it make sense to raise our next round of equity? When does it make sense to raise our next round of venture debt? When does it make sense to cut down on our ad spending relative to our peers? Where are we overspending? Where are we underspending? And so you can build this network effect of all of these different financial analytics, which previously were available by banks. It's just banks couldn't access it because they had offline tech stacks. And so essentially what we're building is the digital Silicon Valley bank for startups.
It almost sounds like you've got a kind of an AI-based CFO built in too. So if you weren't, financially savvy or hadn't grown a startup before, you've got all that intelligence baked into your software. It's way more than just the funding, obviously.
Yeah, so we pull in all of your financial data, whether it's QuickBooks, Xero, Zoho Books, etc. We pull in all of your banking data through Plaid and Finicity. We ingest all of that financial data, and because of that, we're able to underwrite the businesses within 24 hours. So historically, what it would have taken you 4 to 6 weeks to raise venture debt, or it would have taken you 3 to 6 months to raise a term sheet from investors, you can come to ARC, onboard in 2 minutes, and have an underwriting offer presented in your hand the next day. And so startups can go from never hearing from ARC, onboarding, and then receiving 10, 20, $30 million within the next 2 to 3 days.
Okay, great. So Austin was actually a student at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, and he was in our Startup Accelerator Launchpad. And boy, has he been launched. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. Let's get into the here and now. We talked about your startup journey. There's a mantra, obviously, in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, and now a lot of places in the startup ecosystem. This mantra of moving fast and breaking things. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think that that idea of moving fast and breaking things comes from the idea of growth at any cost. So essentially, as VCs try to invest their capital, they want to get large paybacks on that capital. They're not looking for 1, 2x. They're looking for 10, 20, 50, 100x, because otherwise their business model doesn't work. And so what they push you to do as a startup is to take that capital and to deploy it into growth. Now, at the growth at any cost mindset, you essentially invest to take mind share, to take market capitalization. And so you're paying more money to acquire customers than the customer's worth. Why? Because essentially the VC is incentivizing you to do that. And so you continuously raise money and continuously get customers. And eventually at the end of the day, you try to hit profitability. Unfortunately, what happened this year is the Fed raised rates. And so those risk models that were historically based on free cash no longer work. And so now you're seeing some of the ramifications of that growth of any cost model coming back to haunt some of those startups who overhired, who overspent, whose unit economics didn't make sense. And now they have to figure out how they're going to stay alive as a business without additional capital injections. So now we go back to when moving fast and breaking things isn't the right approach. So in marketing, one of the biggest values that you have is your database. Well, why? Because you can use the database for anything. You can use it for remarketing, you can use it for prospecting, you can use it for targeting, you can use it for all these different things. How do you do that? How do you build a database that is scaled and has a lot of contacts that are always up to date? The way that we built the database of almost 1 million e-commerce retailers was by defining our ICP, which in this case was e-commerce retailers, using a tool like Built-in to find out what e-commerce platform they're on. So now we know they're on this e-commerce platform. Here are the accounts. Then you verified those accounts and enrich it with contact information. And then once you have that information, you upload it into your CRM, and then you can start using it. For those of you who service startups, because that's a very niche application, you can access all this data through Crunchbase. So all of the startups that portfolio VCs have invested in are on their websites. You can take those portfolio companies and enrich it with Crunchbase data. Then you enrich the Crunchbase data with ZoomInfo, Apollo, or Casper to find out the contact information. And then once you have a database of all of those contacts, you have a strong foundation to act with and to launch forward. So sometimes moving fast and breaking things doesn't work. I'll give you a case in point. We decided last July that we were going to launch an e-commerce site. Now, mind you, we're an e-commerce checkout provider. And so you'd think, hey, launching an e-commerce site, we just plug in the checkout.
Now, this is with Bolt, obviously.
This is with Bolt, correct.
Not Art, right?
Yep, correct. So 2 years ago, we launched this site. And, we think, hey, maybe we'll sell a couple hundred hoodies and it'll be all good. We launched the site. We sell 1,000 hoodies in the first hour. We launched the next hour, has another 1,500 hoodies go out the door. The third hour, we sell 2,500 hoodies. The fourth hour, we sell 5,000 hoodies in 30 minutes. And then in the span of 5 minutes, we sold 15,000 hoodies. What did that do? It brought down the entire Bolt checkout network and tossed the entire ecosystem. And not only that, but it affected not just our environment, but all of our retailers. And so the learning there was you got to engage engineering first, because they would have been able to solve it, spin up all of our processes so that it could handle the input of capacity, but we just didn't do that. So sometimes you have to break things and move fast, but sometimes you have to do the work and the hard work first and make sure that everything doesn't fall apart.
Yeah, it almost seems move fast and breaking things is fine, but you better be prepared for the fallout when blank breaks, right?
Yeah, it's ironic. When we registered for that merchant account, they asked what the phone number was, right? Because as a retailer, you have to provide a phone number so consumers can call you. Well, I put my cell phone number on that transactional record, and all 30,000 of those customers got my cell phone number, and I had calls for days and days and days. So there's things you can break. Right. There's really things you shouldn't break.
Right.
And one of the things you can do really well is build that database from the start.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's a good lesson, regardless if you're from an educational institution, you're in startup mode, small business, whoever. There's as many gems in there. Number one, if you're looking to grow again, even if obviously you're not a startup, looking at the data you have, and that maybe having different people look at it and look at it in different ways, because there could be intelligence in there that you've never thought of. And then obviously making sure that you're testing out new things, but being prepared for things to blow up. Let's get into our title of this show, which was Tofu, MOFU, BOFU, Eieio. I added that last part on there, obviously, just to be silly. But let's talk about the context of these words. Obviously, we're not talking about, Asian food that we're eating, squishy Asian food. So talk about what these are and how any organization, regardless of what type they are, needs to consider these elements.
Yeah. So high level, Tofu, MOFU, BOFU, it's just marketing jargon. What it means is people that have never heard of you, people that have sort of heard from you, people that have heard from you are ready to buy. So Tofu, never heard of you. People in the middle of the funnel, heard of you, maybe not ready to buy. Bottom of the funnel, ready to buy.
I just want to talk about this. So just because we're going to have some students, right, watching this, can you do the basics of sales funnel and again, define each one of those?
Sure. So at the top, you have top of the funnel. Those are people who have never heard of you, might be looking for solutions, might not be looking for solutions. People in the middle of the funnel, which is people that may know that you exist, may not know that you exist, may know how to solve their problem, not quite sure who to go with. And then ultimately at the bottom of the funnel is BOFU, and that's people that are aware of you, are aware of your solution, are aware of the problem, and are ready to buy. You just have to get right in front of them at the right time in the right place.
So when you're looking at those elements, so, let's say we understand that process. If, let's say we had a very basic company, let's say we're selling glasses, right? And our customer are women ages 18 to 25. And I know this is an obscure example. We didn't talk about it prior to the show, so I apologize for that. Tell us a little bit about if you were the CMO and you needed to analyze the sales funnel and Tofu, MOFU, BOFU, what would be at the top of that funnel? What would be some different ways that you would draw people in?
Yeah. So the first thing, if I'm a CMO and I'm coming to a company and I have no idea anything about the company, I'm going to go try to get as much data as I can. So I'm going to pull down all of their analytics data from Google. I'm going to pull down all of their search console data to see what people are searching for. I'm going to go do competitive research with a tool called SEMrush or SpyFu, and you can see exactly what people are searching for and what kind of keywords that you came up against, as well as what your competitors are going up against. And so now you have a competitive landscape of like, okay, here's what people are searching for. Here's how people found me. And so people can approach the funnel two different ways. They can approach it from the top, which is you're trying to drive as many people into the funnel as possible. So you're trying to drive as much traffic into the funnel. The problem is that as a CMO, you have to deliver results. What's the easiest way to deliver results? To start at the bottom of the funnel, to take people who are already ready and able to buy and just need that little push to get them across the finish line.
Right.
And so if I'm the CMO, the first thing I'm going to set up, let's assume we've done all this research. We assume that we've already gotten to this place. I already know what my top products are. I already know what my top keywords are. If we don't have branded keywords set up, meaning I say I run Josie's glasses, I'm going to go set up branded keyword campaigns to capture anybody searching for Josie's glasses. If I don't have email set up, meaning somebody comes in, they want to buy, but they abandon the cart, I'm going to go send them a transactional email that says, hey, Josie, you missed these glasses, come back and buy. I'm going to set that up. If I have a database of all of my customers that have previously bought, I'm going to go into that well and say, hey, thanks for becoming a shopper, offering 10% off this month to come try us again. That's where I would start, at the bottom of the funnel. It's a little bit different if you got a more complicated B2B business. That's where my skill set has been most of my career, is buyers that have a credit card and are willing to buy, but they can't buy right away. They have to have 3 or 4 different people bought in. And so you have to build a funnel that not just captures their attention at the top, but captures their attention all the way through the funnel and gets not just them engaged, but also all the other decision makers in that buying journey. And so consumers not my expertise, but B2B is. And so what I would say is, if you're an e-commerce brand, you're just starting out, maybe you have some customers, I would spend all of my time on the bottom of the funnel and just figure out, why are people buying? What do they like about it? Like, what do they care about? Then you can start to create and test different things to start going up the funnel. And eventually at some point, you'll get to the point of, okay, now I've exhausted all of the people that have already known about me, wanted to buy, etc. And now I can start putting more fuel into the funnel at the top.
I think, the other element is people are moving through the funnel. So we have the Entrepreneurship Educators Facebook group that we started in January. We have just over 600 members, about over 500 are high school teachers. We've done nothing but help and give out free assignments and videos and quizzes and all this other. All we've been doing is building trust for the last 11 months. And now we've asked, what do they want, right? And we're starting to provide them what they want only now. We could have gone in backwards and say, hey, buy this class, right? Buy this book. And so it's taken quite a lot of time to build that trust. But I think a lot of organizations, especially if they're under pressure, right? If it's a startup and you're trying to survive, or your large organization and your CEO has just said, hey, you need to crank up sales, or you might not be around in a month, right? You might not have that luxury of time, but it's so important to take that time and build that trust as you're moving people through the funnel. All right. We try to wrap up in 20 minutes, and then we'll take some questions here. So one of the things I've found in my career being marketing and sales, it's a couple of years longer than yours, is I found that marketing, if things aren't going well, if business isn't going well, marketing will blame sales and say, you guys just aren't using the tools that we're giving you in generating sales. And sales will say, marketing, you guys are completely out of touch, and we need to get some new marketing people or a new agency. How do you marry both of those? Because obviously, if you're in a startup, you are marketing and sales, right? So that might be a little bit easier conversation to have, hopefully. But in organizations you've been in, how do you see that collaboration, that communication happening?
Yeah, it's super interesting. So at my time at Bolt, we focused almost exclusively, not all the time, but in the early days, on driving MQLs, which are marketing qualified leads, into the funnel. And so we would spend all of our time developing assets and developing campaigns to drive marketing qualified leads into the funnel, but we didn't have any insight into, did they turn into sales qualified opportunities? Did they turn into sales closed opportunities, closed won opportunities? And so we spent all of our time at the top just driving people into the funnel that looked and sounded like the right people, but no idea if they were actually ready to convert. At ARC, we took a completely different approach. all of our alignment across the entire revenue organization is marketing and sales. So what we get incentivized to drive and what we're trying to drive as a revenue organization is opportunities. And so when you start to drive just opportunities, you stop caring about the vanity metrics. How many leads did I drive? How many SQLs did I drive? What I care about is how many opportunities did I have and how did I drive those into the funnel? So 2 quick tips for those of you who are in a B2B organization that have a sales organization and maybe you're on the marketing front. Starting at the top with OKRs. So you want to start at the top with your organizational objectives. What are the objectives we have as a revenue organization? All of our OKRs are tied directly to sales numbers. How much advanced volume do we want to drive? How much deposit volume do we want to drive? And everybody in the revenue organization is aligned to driving revenue, not driving leads, not driving qualified leads, opportunities. The second biggest thing is, now that you've had this OKR and structure set up, is going out and listening to reps on their sales calls. So if you guys have Gong, if you have Sales Loft, you can listen to their calls and you can understand what's working and what's not working. You can give them new lines and figure out whether that talk track resonates or if it doesn't. And when you have those tools, you can actually filter into those conversations and see at real time whether it works or whether it doesn't. And so I've acted as an SDR for the past month and a half. Any inbound lead that comes into our funnel gets dropped directly into my outbound sequence through outreach. And then they book time on my calendar and we walk through these solutions together. And so I'm talking to all these prospects before they ever talk to a salesperson. What does that align and what does that inform? It informs every single decision I have across every advertising campaign, because I know exactly what the market cares about and how they're talking about these solutions. And so by stepping outside of yourself as a marketer and putting your hat on as a salesperson, like what do they care about? They care about closing opportunities. What does the marketer person care about? Now they care about closing opportunities too. And so by aligning those two organizations together, you achieve much more volume and much more success than you would trying to pull two opposite ends of the same rope.
Gotcha. All right, we're going to go to some questions here. So we've got a question from Simon in San Diego. Simon sounds like he's a high school student. Simon has said, if you have to give one piece of career advice to a high school student that's interested in startups, what piece of advice would you give them?
Yeah, it's a good question. G's probably going to say something different than I would. I would say to go join I would say to go join an organization first. So you figure out what does running a business mean? What does it look like? What does it feel like? How do you interact with different people? How do you start to understand how business works? I think you can learn a lot of that stuff by yourself, but I think it's a lot harder to get there versus learning on somebody else's time. And then once you've developed some of these skill sets, meaning you know how to sell, meaning you know how to communicate, meaning you know how to market, meaning you know how basic finance works, and you have some of these core competencies to then go launch your own, then I would say go do it. And when you do it, make sure you don't have anything holding you back. I think a lot of the time you jump into something, but you have an escape plan. Well, if you have an escape plan, your back's not against the wall. And so you're not incentivized to actually put everything you have into it, because you have this like, oh, well, if it doesn't work out, I can always jump here. And so for me, anytime I've ever been faced with like, oh, I have this line of security, I always try to set it away. And then once I go down that path, I've fully committed to go executing. And so there's no way I can go back. And so what I would say is get those core competencies together, get those core skills, and then make the leap. And when you do it, make sure you're committed to the outcome. And you might fail, but realize that it's okay. And the best part about you taking that leap is that think about the hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people who didn't. I forget what the survey was, but they had surveyed thousands and thousands and thousands of seniors, and they asked them, what's the one thing you regret in life? And all of them said that it wasn't the things that they did, it was the things that they didn't do. So if you have an idea and you want to go pursue it, by all means, go hands at it. Just realize that it's okay if you fail and pick yourself up and go to the next one.
And none of them said, I wish I'd worked more for someone else.
That's right.
All right. So we're going to wrap up here in a second. We've got a question from Ray Missoula. So Ray's question is about raising startup capital. So we hear, I'm going to put some words in Ray's mouth here. Obviously, there's this whole romantic notion about raising capital, see Shark Tank these days. What's the ugly part about it? I mean, forget the parties afterwards and shooting off bottles of dumb and going on the VC's yacht and all these other great things. But what's the ugly part about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when you take somebody else's money, now the fire and the time clock is started because they're expecting return on their investment. And so if you thought it was hard when you were the one driving the bandwagon, just wait until you take VCs and they tell you you have to hit this growth target, otherwise we're going to cut you off. Now, because they have equity in your business, they probably have a board seat. If you don't deliver, they can kick you out of your own company. You can look at Steve Jobs, who got removed from his company. You can look at several, Travis Kalanickis from Uber. And so when you take other people's money, it changes the entire dynamic of the business. Now, what the benefit of that money is, if you are raising capital in Wisconsin and you have $1 million to build a business, and I'm raising capital in California and I raise 100 million in business, well, the operations and the tactics we're going to use to try to grow our customer base are going to be very different. And so if you have a very large market segment and you are going after a very large market, and there are competitors that have a lot more money than you do, you have two choices. You can either go where they are and capture that money and try to compete head to head, or you can take a completely different approach. And that different approach is kind of like the lines of you're jabbing and then you're retreating, and then you're jabbing and then you're retreating. We're in this position today. We have competitors that have raised $1 billion+, and we've only raised a couple hundred million. So our tactics are very different from the tactics that they're using. But the reason why we're winning is because we can move faster, execute better, and we can be more holistically executing across the entire funnel. Again, everybody's aligned towards this one objective. And so everybody comes together to unite to hit whatever objective we have outlined. So when you're raising capital, that's great. But consider what the implications of raising that capital are, and if you're ready for the ramifications of taking somebody else's money, because there's no going back. Once you sign that term sheet, you can't say, here's your money back. Like, I'm not interested anymore. You've now taken it. You've committed to them. You need to deliver results. Otherwise, there's real world impact.
All right. Last question is from Gail from Raleigh. So Gail's question is about remote work. So there's obviously two different schools of thought, Gail. Well, there's people, I don't find that people are on the middle ground on this issue. And you've obviously have the perspective from an employee that started out with remote work and a manager as well. What do you see as the ups and the downs? Because obviously there are both.
Yeah. So the biggest downside with remote work is that there's a lack of alignment, right? When I'm 2 feet away from somebody and I need something done, and I need an answer right now, they answer the question because they're right there. If I'm on Slack and something comes across, this morning we had a journalist from a large publication reach out and they wanted an answer to their question because they're writing an article about us. Well, if my CEO is on a different timeline and he's not up yet, or somebody else is on a different timeline and somewhere else, you don't have that connection. You don't have that communication because there's that barrier of, well, maybe he's walking the dog, well, maybe he's eating lunch, or maybe he's doing all of these different things. That's the downside. The benefit is you don't have to commute. I was spending an hour every day commuting to work. Well, if I don't have to spend an hour every day commuting to work, that means I can deliver an hour more productivity. It means I can spend an hour more with my fiance, walking the dogs. It means I can spend an hour of my life doing what it is that I'm on the earth to do, live, right? And so there's both benefits and downsides to both. What I'll say is if you're a large organization, meaning thousands of people, remote work's totally fine because at the end of the day, you're going to survive. When you're in startups and your back's against the wall, and if you don't sell the next $1,000, you're going to go out of business. Having everybody in the same place focused on the same mission at the same time is invaluable for scaling that business, because while everybody else is focused on 100 million other problems in their life, you can all be dedicated towards solving this one problem together. And so we've deliberately come together and established go-to-market in San Francisco. We have team members in New York. We get together regularly to make sure everybody's on the same page. But by building that strong foundation of everybody understanding and connecting and building trust with one another, that's how we're able to execute and operate at such a high level.
Great. All right. Well, you know how I'm militant on time, Austin. So we are at time. Thanks, guests, for being on the show. Thanks to our guest, Austin, for being on the show. Thanks for participation, everyone. If you do want to learn more about ARC, you can go to arc.tech. You can join and learn more about the Entrepreneurship Educators Association at myeea.org. And a big thank you to Planet Pitch and planetpitch.co, the world's first international high school social entrepreneurship competition. I'm actually working on this. We got a great team from Harvard, and we've got a high school student from LA and some professors in social entrepreneurship. Some other great high schools are building an awesome team. So I encourage you to check that out, planetpitch.co. And I'll also leave some of these links in the comments section on the video. Thanks a lot, and have a great week. Happy Thanksgiving if you celebrate. Thanks, guys.